Just had a sort of a chat over the break, and what it seems to me is that the particular recommendations that the government has, well, the two ministers have sent through, that require our sort of special attention, and actually they pick up the main issues that we are concerned about as a council, are the ones that are being declined. So I actually suggest that we go through them, and at each step of the way we take particular regard of the Order in Council, and then you know, sort of at the end we'll resolve to accept those. So let's go through the ones that we're going to not modify our plan before it's notified. So I highlighted the areas, so I'm really going to let you, Brigitte, choose the order that we do them in, because you've got the team lined up. So
we do. I'll introduce Scott Blair again. Scott will speak to the recommendations and Minister's comments that he has given a draft recommendation to not accept, and the responses and reasons for that. So Scott, I'll ask you to focus on intensification, Lifestar, Lifemark Homestar, urban design, and that's why John Scallon is here also, and those other matters.
Great.
Okay, starting at page 125.
Yep.
And we're looking at recommendation 3. This came from a paragraph, from paragraph 23, where the comments suggested that the council had not gone far enough to enable non-residential type activities in the residential area. There was no specific recommendation arising from it, although it could be linked back to recommendation 3, but we've responded to the specifically to the paragraph anyway. We've said effectively that we are providing for community facilities by way of listed activities in the residential zones, that some, such as education, healthcare, and what we're calling spiritual facilities, will be enabled on some properties within the residential suburban zone and other zones where they sit on the corners of collector roads and other roads. So we're making some provision for them at that level. But we also felt that other types of community facilities, such as, shall we say, community halls or libraries, or even larger facilities like that, were probably better directed to the commercial zones, at least the commercial local zone. That's the very brief summary of our rationale there. So we're recommending no modification at that point. The next no modification that we've recommended is at recommendation 7, where they've asked us to... and that's at page 142, where the ministers have asked us to review the sustainability of the external standards. This relates specifically to Homestar and Lifemark. We have gone back and reviewed them. We've noticed that there seems to be an error in the minister's assumptions, and that they're assuming that the external Homestar and Lifemark standards are compulsory or mandatory. They're not. We're recommending that they be a voluntary alternative to the standards that we're recommending in the plan. We've also added a bit more material here about the costs and benefits in relation to using these standards. And as officers, we feel that we can maintain that while there would undoubtedly be a short-term increase in building costs. I think one of my associates estimated that at about 2%, but that would once again pay itself back in a very short period of 3 to 4 years. So we're comfortable that the standards should remain for public notification and go out for public discussion.
I think you should highlight the recovery strategy directive because I think that's highly relevant to what we have to consider. And we are having particular regard to the Order in Council, but we also have to have regard to the recovery strategy. In fact, we can't have anything inconsistent in our district plan with the recovery strategy. I'm actually surprised that ministers would ask us to consider something that was inconsistent with their own recovery strategy.
That's absolutely correct. I think Brigitte, in her opening comments, noted that the officers have taken a much, shall we say, a wider view on the obligations of the council in terms of the Resource Management Act and being consistent with the regional policy statement and various other drivers. And once we take those into account, we weigh those against, once again, the costs and benefits. We are still confident that these are appropriate. Mechanisms in the city plan. Certainly, you're quite right that there are definitely higher order strategic documents that require us to look into these matters.
Well, it specifically says rebuilding infrastructure and buildings in a resilient, cost-effective and energy-efficient manner.
That's correct.
Well, it seems to me that it would be inappropriate to remove what are in fact guidelines from our document when we are required really to think about that when we in the recovery strategy.
I think that's a fair summary, yes.
Do you want to comment also about the mandate under the Resource Management Act?
Well, yes. Part 2 of the RMA, I think it's a recent amendment, requires the council to look at the efficiency of the use of resources as well. I think that's in section 7. Section 32. Section 32. And certainly we've taken that into account. In terms of the overall, shall we say, purpose of the Act, we feel that health and efficiency are particularly mandated in Part 2 of the Act in terms of the purpose of the Act, sustainable management of natural and physical resources, and there's also direct mention in Section 7 of having particular regard to efficiency and end use of energy. We feel that we are, as officers, we feel that we have a mandate, if not an obligation, to explore these matters.
So can we go through the affordability issue as well? Because, I mean, that's obviously in the government's mind. They want to make sure that buildings that we build are affordable. But, I mean, the information that you've given us to look at talks about banks and lenders now taking into account running costs when assessing home buyers' ability to service loans for mortgage applications. And the misperception that building sustainable homes conflicts with building affordable homes on the basis that the payback period is actually quite short. And if you look at the what is it called, the lifelong cost, the whole of life costs, then you're actually looking not just at the upfront costs of building the building, but actually those running costs, and then how quickly you can repay the additional costs that you've got up front.
Yep, you're correct. Probably what we haven't touched on here is what we see as quite significant benefits to the economy and the community in general over the lifetime as well. They are harder to quantify.
They are.
But in terms of certainly in terms of payback, we feel that we have, in terms of immediate economic payback, we feel that we have sufficiently defined those.
I mean, the example that's given here is that a Christchurch house that was built 5 square metres smaller than perhaps what it was originally going to be would actually not have any additional cost at all.
That's correct.
There's a sense
Those
in
are the
which,
figures that have been supplied to us.
yeah, this is already underway in our social housing, for instance. I mean, the total life cost, we've been doing this for some time. The horses bolt. Can I just ask whether there's a disconnect with LERP Action 49? I'm not sure what happened. Do you think there's been a disconnect with between what's proposed and the LERP action here? Maybe someone's been given incorrect
Could you refresh our
advice
memory on LERP Action 49, what that is?
Promoting quality urban environment
Right.
and meeting council obligations under RMA sustainable management of land, air and water.
I think I can. At
Promote-
this stage,
promoting
I can really only speculate about that disconnection. I think that there's probably there's a stronger emphasis within CERA or the CCDU. Thank you. There's probably a stronger emphasis in terms of driving lower costs than there is than the emphasis that they've put on Action 49. So, I mean, and I think that's pure speculation on my part, but I suspect that that's the case.
Interesting, there's an assumption that it's kind of an argument between affordability and sustainability, which, and I think the staff response here is excellent, that actually it's not an either or.
No, in our view, they can be the same.
Yes.
Can I just add something? In terms of the hierarchy of decision making, the council cannot make a decision or recommendation that is inconsistent with the land use recovery plan.
That's right. And we can't make a decision that's inconsistent with the recovery strategy either.
Correct.
And both of them require us to turn our attention to this matter. And I actually believe the way that has been proposed by staff. Yanni?
To check on that, because I thought this was going through an order in council process with RMA considerations. Are you saying that we now have to think about recovery strategy as well?
We always have had.
Correct,
As soon as the recovery strategy came in, it effectively provided an umbrella against which no plans of the council, so we're notifying our district plan,
Right.
no plan can be inconsistent with its coverage. It's the same for the Selwyn District Council and the Waimakariri District Council.
Right, but the recovery strategy is pretty high level. The land use recovery plan is probably where there's more specifics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct. So we're the council is preparing and notifying a plan under the RMA, but there are some extra considerations that it has to deal with, and the main ones are the land use recovery plan, the Central City recovery plan, and the recovery strategy.
And was that put in through the order in council?
No, that comes through the emergency legislation.
Okay.
So there's a section in there that gives those documents that status.
The Sewer Act.
And the regional policy statement, does that include anything around energy efficiency or sustainability or accessibility?
The order in council itself?
No,
No, the RPS.
Yes, it does.
But I think it would be
there are
quite-
RPS related policy.
It would be quite useful to, I think, just highlight that in our response as well. But I concur with my colleagues. I think you've had a really good response to this. I just think the more ammunition you can put in so that when that goes to the hearings panel and for public consultation, you know, the more support we can show for this approach, the better we'll be.
I think that the indication from council is that this is something that we want to pursue, and I think we should have particular regard to the order in council. So the order in council would require us to look specifically at the, I'll just turn to the order in council so that I can have particular regard to it. And which schedule is it? Schedule?
Attachment 1. So it's
No, I haven't.
page 9.
I've got the order in council in front of me. Oh,
Schedule 4.
Schedule 4?
Yes.
Thank you.
So I think this has very particular high regard for
Particular
B,
regard.
page 38.
So basically, reliance on resource consent processes, and this actually reduces resource consent processes, because this is, if they meet these standards, then it's an automatic assumption that they're over the standard required under the district plan. So we've achieved that. The number, extent and prescriptiveness of development controls and design standards in the rules in order to encourage innovation and choice. Well, we've done that within the framework that we are allowed to. So we've got to have, we've got a hierarchy that overrides that in terms of the recovery strategy. This recovery strategy does have a provision, so does the RPS, so does the
Land use recovery
plan, and so we have done that to the extent that we are able to, and the requirements for notification and written approval. And as I say, we've resolved that. And I think there was a question around affordability, and we've certainly turned our attention to that as well. So I think having particular regard to the Order in Council on this particular matter, I think that staff have done an excellent job in drawing our attention to the whole range of issues that we need to look at there. David?
I was just going to say whether it would be helpful in some respects to have a chart of all the other plans, policies and things that we have to have regard to when we're making our district plan.
Well, we as officers do have that.
But that's what staff have done.
Yes.
They've actually given us all of this information.
Yes, and the reasons.
So that while we're going through each one of them.
Just in a chart form.
Yeah, but for each, I mean, there's no point having the, for example, the recovery strategy in front of us. The recovery strategy is relevant to this issue. It may not be relevant to other issues.
I appreciate that, but other people, or community board members and the general public, when they're actually trying to understand the plan,
Yeah.
it may be sort of helpful to just have that broad overview of the sorts of things that need to be taken into consideration when we are...
I think that's a very good idea, and I think that, I mean, apart from this process, I think that drawing up, and actually some people within the communication section of council have already drafted basically the hierarchy of documents. So we should do that, but it probably needs the land use recovery plan and the RMA requirements added to it. Yeah.
Happy to do that. We can just bring to you the presentation that we did to you very early on this year when we first talked about the chapters, all of the influencing documentation that we have to consider.
Yeah. So, but I think that the point that David's making is that the Order in Council wasn't known then, and to put that alongside to assist the public as they go through their process of making submissions will be useful.
It's a very good idea.
Yeah. All right, so are there any other questions on this one? I think there's general acceptance around the table, and this is one that we will want to make a submission on as well, because we suspect that there will be submissions in the alternative, and we will want to be in a position to make a counter submission. Is that generally agreed by councillors? Yep. All right, so moving on to the next one.
Okay, the next I'll discuss, and with the help of my friend John Scallon, who's helped me put together some of these comments. I'll discuss recommendations 10 and 11 together. They are effectively seeking both seeking the same thing.
What page?
At pages 147 and 148. The comments in general suggest that the council has not rezoned sufficient or upzoned, increased the density into residential medium density sufficient areas around our key activity centres and our suburban centres. In some of our larger suburban centres, you'll recall that we had quite a long discussion on this when we brought these matters to the council. Previously, and we were asked to revisit these areas. I've got John here who can answer any specific questions around densities within certain areas, but we have in the last few days done what I'd call a very high-level analysis of some of the yields that will be possible from the other mechanisms that were put in place in the city plan as well. These include the remainder. Thank you. These include the remainder of the unused land bank in what is the existing Living 3 zone, and using very conservative figures, we feel that around about 4,000 additional household units are available, and this is based on only about 20% of the available land bank being rebuilt within the Living 3. In terms of the minor dwelling units within the Living 1 equivalent residential suburban density area that we're proposing being enabled, there may be as many as 3,500 additional minor dwelling units, and this is at an uptake of only 5% of the available properties. And then in the greenfield area, our calculations, or we previously reported to the Strategy and Planning Committee that there are 19,769 residential sections available to 2028. Admittedly, not all of those are available now because some of them are under infrastructure constraints, but by 2028 they will be available. In terms of our upzoned areas, we feel that there's around about 3,000 residential units available within, and this is based on previous calculations that we've made and presented to the council, around those key activity centres and major suburban centres, and that'll come to just over 30,000 residential units available by 2028. And then I'd also note that in terms of additional central city additional households or residential units within the central city, I think we did quickly calculated there could be, if the targets are met, there would be an additional 7,000 residential units in there. So the LERP itself predicts that the Christchurch area will need 23,700 residential units by 2028. So, in the officer's view, I think that what we've allowed is quite considerable in terms of what the projected demand is. I'd also point out that there are a number of other mechanisms within the draft plan, such as the enhanced development mechanism and the community housing redevelopment mechanism. High density within retirement villages, the existing LERP mechanism of replacement of two houses for one house where it's been damaged or destroyed in the earthquakes. We've enabled the conversion of a residential unit in the residential suburban zone into two. We've enabled comprehensive residential developments in Living 2. That's as a permitted activity up to 3 residential units. Over that, a restricted discretionary activity based on urban design. We've enabled comprehensive social housing developments in what are now the equivalent of the Living 1 and Living 2 zones. And what we haven't been able to do a quick calculation on is the yield from the Living 2, from the land bank left in the Living 2 zone. So we add all of those together, it's very hard for us to conclude that we haven't provided sufficient supply, or we don't have sufficient mechanisms within the city plan to enable intensification.
So, but in terms of the numbers, we're required, just having particular regard to the Order in Council, the district plan has capacity to accommodate up to 23,700 additional dwellings by 2028. And that's correct. That's done.
So when I run through all of everything that I've just run through, we have more than amply supplied, in my opinion.
Through you, Madam Chair, we will include those numbers in the response.
Yeah, and the intensification opportunities in line with the principle of supporting key activity centres and the central city. Well, we don't have a say over the central city in terms of that matter. That's a matter that's being dealt with by the government with the
CCRP.
The residential chapter of the
CCR.
Central City Recovery Plan. And so we're not required to make any changes to the legislation, to the district plan. We're not required to notify anything in that regard, but we will notify in phase
Yes.
two.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and that will be already determined when we notify. And but in terms of the key activity centres, obviously there was some discussion in the media recently about Barrington and others. So there's been no change to that.
No.
And do you want to just spell out for us why, so that we can have particular regard to the?
I think John can
Order
touch
in council.
on why we excluded Barrington and the likes of
And Riccarton, yeah.
John.
Oh,
I mean, I know the answer to the question, I just want it on the record.
So initially we took direction from the RPS and LERP to look at all the key activity centres and large neighbourhood centres across the city. We looked at each of those in turn to identify what would be an appropriate extent for potential residential intensification based on accessibility. And from there, we looked at the detail of each centre, whether there was capacity constraints or character constraints, all the range of issues that you may want to consider when looking at a change in density in the area, effectively a change in the environment in that area. So for Barrington, first, and I'll move on to the others. So for Barrington, when we looked at Barrington, we came across an infrastructure constraint in the wastewater system down there, which we took the view was a constraint which we couldn't ignore and would be a limit on servicing medium density development in the area. Taking that factor into account and the enhanced development mechanism, which falls quite comprehensively around Barrington, and within the enhanced development mechanism there is a requirement in there to assess the infrastructure constraints as part of an individual consent for a enhanced development mechanism development, and we thought that was a more appropriate approach to medium density in that area around Barrington. Okay.
Yep.
The area around Riccarton, in particular the area to the north of Riccarton Road, again there was a wastewater constraint that was identified following some more detailed investigation work by the engineers. That came quite late in the day, but we acted on that information, and for that reason we said, okay, there's actually not capacity north of Riccarton Road to accommodate medium density at this time.
Yep. Just a minute. Yep.
One of the other considerations we took into account was community feedback. As you know, we went out to each area and we presented to the plans to the area and took the feedback from local residents. It varied, the feedback we got, but some centres there was particularly strong feeling against increasing the density in the area. Riccarton was one centre where there was particularly strong feeling against intensification. Barrington was also a bit more of a mix, but there was also generally a strong feeling against intensification as well through the residential medium density zone.
But that tied in particular, and just having particular regard to the Order in Council, it says having regard to constraints on environmental and infrastructure capacity, particularly with regard to natural hazards. I mean, this isn't natural hazards, but having regard to infrastructure capacity. In both cases, both Barrington, you feel that can be resolved by the current enhanced development mechanism, which in itself has provisions to protect against development that would put pressure where there are infrastructure constraints. And in Riccarton, it is purely the infrastructure constraints. So if there was a decision sometime in the future to increase the infrastructure to support that area, then that could be looked at in the future, but it couldn't be looked at now just simply because of those constraints.
Correct.
Yeah.
Although it wasn't just the infrastructure constraints, there was a very unified community pushback
yeah, I was just having particular regard to the Order in Council on that particular matter. So,
Thanks, John. So basically, Barrington, it remains really like a medium density area, and the way around that for any residents would be that council consider that enhanced development measures. So it's a different way of actually dealing with the issues that the residents raise. Is that what you're saying?
For Barrington, the enhanced development mechanism is already operative in the current plan, and that allows for medium density to effectively the equivalent of Living 3 today. That is a mechanism which allows, through the consenting process, medium density to be built in what is currently a Living 2 area. Around Barrington, that is all Living 2 area. So through the consent process, those issues concerning infrastructure and the impact environment can be assessed through that process.
Yeah. So I think, and it's, I'm not sure how this has arisen because I wasn't at that meeting, but I just would gather that the residents' sort of understanding of this is not accurate. That in fact they believe that in fact there won't be further medium density.
I wasn't at the meeting, so I can't comment directly. I did, however, read the article in one of the local papers.
Yes.
And I got the gist of the opinion there. I think perhaps there may be a slight misunderstanding. Yes, we are not proposing to move to a residential medium density zone around Barrington. However, the enhanced development mechanism does apply largely across that area.
Yeah. Thanks, John.
yep, Yanni?
Thank you. Just on page, the page where you talk about the EDM will look at Linwood. Oh, sorry, page 148. It is intended to reconsider the residential zone in this area as part of the review of the EDM provision. I'm not aware of what review we've signalled, and certainly, can you just try and clarify what that actually means in terms of timing and in terms of process?
I'll let Scott talk about the EDM.
Now, the EDM was introduced through the Land Use Recovery Plan, 6 December 2013. It is a mechanism that relates to what they call, or what is called, a floating zone. It's based on a number of walkability criteria and distances and access to services such as public transport or walkability to commercial services and separation from industrial areas and those types of things. Now they can be generally modelled in terms of where they are in terms of our geographic information systems, but in terms of John, did you? In terms of Linwood?
My understanding is that the EDM and the CHRM already exist in certain areas of Linwood, but what you seem to be indicating is that we're going to reconsider that in the Linwood area as well as the Barrington Church Corner area as some sort of review, but I don't know what, I'm really interested to know, like, are we doing a review? What's the time frame for that review?
No, we are.
So I think that comment probably needs to just be modified to actually say what it means, which is what I presume it means is that you can still get intensification in these areas through the EDM process, which is a separate process that was approved under the Land Use Recovery Plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, accepted.
Is that?
Yes.
Right. And as part of this, obviously, because we can't be inconsistent with the Land Use Recovery Plan, we can't change those areas, we can't change those
mechanisms.
Mechanisms.
Great.
And they did include walkability to schools as well, or proximity to schools?
Yes.
Ellie?
I want to ask on page 189, 188 and 189, where the tables from showing the transitions from
Is that still in the area that we're on?
It's talking about intensification and the change and the number of houses. If I'm wrong, then we'll
No,
wait.
that's correct, you're right.
Okay.
Yep.
So what Pauline and I are aware of, and you will obviously be aware of too, is the amount of infrastructure damage, and particularly the Shirley area and some of the St Albans area. I'm not even talking about Flockton, I'm talking up Shirley Road. And yet the majority of land is L1 to start off with there, so there's quite a massive change in what's going to happen in the land in that Shirley area, if I'm reading this correctly. And in fact, the Shirley area's got the second highest total net increase for moving into that intensification. We've heard of the problems of infrastructure in the Riccarton area and the other Barrington. How much cognizance is being paid to the issue of infrastructure in Shirley when you look at the amount of intensification proposed?
So the same question that was put to the engineers regarding Riccarton and any of the centres was the same question put to them regarding Shirley. The response we got was that the infrastructure in Shirley was not a constraint on move to medium density.
Okay. Anecdotally and on a day-to-day living experience, it's a nightmare. I know that I can't see under the road, but there are some major repairs proposed for that area, particularly around the Hills Road and Shirley Road intersection, for example. With this amount, so you're not concerned by this amount of intensification in an area that's severely damaged and will continue to be repaired for quite some time?
We do depend on the engineers and various other people with expertise to give us this information.
Can I just ask though, is the feedback we've had from engineers before the skirt re-optimisation or after? Because there's been some quite major decisions made, and I know our engineers have some quite strong concerns over what's currently happening. So I think it would be interesting to hear how long ago this advice was sought, and if that advice has been updated in light of the roads and the pipes that won't be fixed, and what that means. Because I've got the same concerns over Linwood, where there's a lot of curb and channeling which is just sitting there, can't cope with the existing water, and it does seem a bit odd that we would encourage intensification in areas that aren't going to be fixed or aren't going to have the capability in the near future.
All I can say is we can see if we can get one of the engineers down here. This information wasn't updated in the last few days in response to the Minister's comments. It's information that we had at the time that these chapters went over to the Ministers.
In respect of staff, I appreciate that, because we've only just found out about this as well, like 2 weeks ago. So these are really new concerns, but they're very strong concerns.
Phil?
Look, I don't want to bang on about this, but just going back to Barrington Linwood Church Corner, I think you indicated in response to Yanni that you might make some change to the wording there. Is that what you meant, or did I misunderstand that?
That was to the reasons. So that's the attachment to the report recording the council officer's recommendations to you. So as part of this process, we have to send a copy of the council's reasons to the ministers. So we will update that to reflect the clarification on that point.
So we probably won't see those though after today.
Well, I've just sent someone upstairs to try and track down the appropriate person to speak to this matter.
Okay, look, thank you. That will help.